give everyone just a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Tonight is going to be really great. Michael had joined earlier, Sophie, and he um, is busy a bit during the day because he's California time, but he'll try to join
Right.
us
Yeah, it's
later.
still 3:30 over there. True.
Yes. So hopefully people will be able to come in and we'll get started. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and start some introductions really quickly. We'll do a brief introduction of the moderators and then the topic, and we will move forward. As usual, the rules of the room, you need to have info in your bio before we bring you up to stage. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of Dr. Harvey's discussion. Tonight, we're going to be talking about celebrity influence on pandemic response. As a reminder, this room is being recorded. So after this discussion, you can share it on all platforms and it will keep track of how many people listen to it outside the platform. So it's kind of a new feature that we're using. And I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Taya Romero. I work in clinical research, and I've been in the industry for about 18 years now. And right now, I'm a portfolio manager, very interested in the pandemic response because we are all remote workers right now due to the pandemic. So I will pass it to Sophie to introduce herself, and then we'll introduce Dr. Harvey, our speaker tonight.
Excellent. I am so excited about this topic. I think this is something everyone kind of murmurs about, but doesn't really attack at the point. So that's what I'm looking forward to tonight. My name is Sophie Johannan. I am a clinical evaluation scientist at a medical device company called Boston Scientific. And before that, I have 18 years experience in clinical research. I'm very similar to Taya's background. And I have a background in healthcare and medicine prior to that. And I am always interested in why Dr. Google is so popular and why the physicians who spend years and years in blood, sweat, and tears training and learning how to diagnose and best treat their patients are not as popular as Dr. Google, or Dr. All of the celebrities that we hear from, and why is it that all the we had this question from actually an international researcher in a room recently. Why is it that with all of the best facilities and the best experts, scientists, and everything that we have in this country, why is the vaccination rate, COVID vaccination rate, so low, lower than other countries with fewer resources and fewer studies going on and less access to vaccines and treatments? It's a wonder to me, and I think this is part of it. So I'm excited for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And I will now introduce Dr. Harvey. Dr. Harvey is a published author. He's written a book on celebrity influence. He's also the director of graduate and undergraduate programs at the University of St. Mary. He's been featured on several news outlets such as CNN. So thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Harvey, and we really look forward to talking about celebrities in the news. I would like to start uh, with your introduction, and then we'll go on from there, Dr. Harvey.
Okay. Well, first I'll say I'm not at all a healthcare provider. Healthcare is not my area of specialization. And I'm a doctor, but I also am not nearly as popular or as trusted as Dr. Google. So I guess I'll just stop saying that. My background is sort of unusual from the standpoint of where I am. I do run a graduate program, particularly an MBA program. Um, I have an experience. I owned a small business. I did international business consulting for a while, but oddly enough, my PhD is in political science, and it's a great interest to me. I'm always interested in how people behave, and particularly in this case, what effect celebrities have in terms of our political attitudes. So that's I don't know, a little bit about me, unless you want to know more.
No, I think that's
I think
great.
that's great.
Thank you for introducing yourself. And I think that this topic is going to be very controversial in a lot of ways because people are now getting their news, like you said, from Google. So it's quite interesting time to be a political scientist, I think. um, so I'll start the conversation with a little quiz, and anyone that would like to join on stage can raise your hand. We're going to be talking about which celebrity is pro-vaccine and which one is negative. So I'll tell you the name and flash your mic if you think that they are negative vaccine. We'll do it that way. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe we can allow the audience also to raise their hand if they want to vote for yes. That way we have more votes. What do you think?
Sure. Or yeah, you could raise your hand or you can come up to stage. That's up to you. So yeah. And Sophie, you can count. We don't have very many
Sure.
people yet. So okay, we'll start with Blake Lively. Blake Lively, is she, if you think she's negative COVID vaccine, raise your hand or clap. Okay, she is positive. Um, let's see, Hugh Jackman, also positive, so that's good. And let's see, Rob Schneider, is he negative or positive? He is negative. He does not like the vaccine at all. He's been saying some very controversial things. Um, let's
Interesting.
Mariah Mariah Carey.
I would say she is negative.
She is positive. She's had her vaccine. Okay, the rapper Offset, positive or
I don't know
negative?
who that is.
Well,
I
he
feel like I
doesn't.
should have done more research on celebrities before I got here.
Offset does not like the vaccine. He's negative. Okay, so we'll say, let's see. Samuel L. Jackson, is he positive or negative? He is positive. He's been vaccinated. And let's see. Jim Carrey, is he pro or
He's
anti?
anti.
He is anti.
He's
Yep.
anti.
Yes, he is. And let's see. Rosario Dawson.
Pro.
Yes, she's pro. And Robert De Niro.
I would guess pro on that one.
Pro. Yeah.
He's actually
What?
anti-vaccine.
Wow.
Yes.
Whoa. Don't get that vaccine. It's bad for you.
Okay, I'll do a few more. Elisa Bonet.
She's anti.
She is anti, and she's getting
Yep.
divorced recently, she announced. Okay, and Steve Martin.
Pro?
Yes, he is pro vaccine. So I think I can't really see a link between any of these celebrities and their positive viewpoint or negative viewpoint of the vaccine. So I will pass it to you, Dr. Harvey, to kind of give us an overview of why this is so interesting to us. Why are we so fascinated with celebrity and their decision making, especially on healthcare issues?
Right. Well, I will say in general, I think people are fascinated with celebrities in part because it's something aspirational. You know, when we watch movies, when we, listen to music or whatever, we're relating to that story and we identify with characters in stories or in other forms of art. And there's this phenomenon where we kind of feel like if we're watching someone, then they kind of feel like our friends. And it's a bit of a weird thing. Like think about things from the other end. It's like you've got this celebrity who is distantly removed from these millions of people, and those millions of people know a whole lot more about them than they knew about the millions of people. And so it's a little bit of an odd phenomenon, but we're aspirational. Like we think that we want to sort of live vicariously through them. We want to be friends with them, and they become sort of permanent fixtures in our life for better and maybe for worse as well.
I can see
I can
that. I
see
can
that. I
see
can see
how
how.
some people relate to different celebrities, and it almost is a way that you identify yourself as being pro or anti a certain celebrity. And I know that you have created a certain type of model for how celebrities influence culture. Could you explain that model to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I started my research, my central question was, how do celebrities influence people politically, right? And so there were three areas where I was able to gather evidence to suggest that these are ways in which they make a difference in terms of affecting people's attitudes or in terms of political thought, right? One is that they spotlight or raise consciousness about issues even more effectively than politicians by more effectively commanding media attention. So they show up in the media at some point and they start talking about a political issue. Sometimes they're even more effective than the president at drawing attention to that. The second is that or I should say, celebrities are often more credible than politicians, and as a result, sometimes more trusted. Now, of course, their credibility varies. Lots of people can get attention. So that first point, sure, it's like if you're famous, you're going to get attention, but not every celebrity is necessarily going to be taken seriously. In general, celebrities are more credible than politicians, but it also depends on the issue and the person. And so there's a few things to think about in terms of uh, when celebrities are going to be taken seriously and seen as more credible. One is if they're connected to advocacy groups. So one, I guess, well-known example is Bono, the lead singer of U2. He's started various organizations. He's advocated for debt relief in the developing world, but he's not done so alone as a single actor, but rather through organizations in affiliation with other experts in the field. And, for whatever reason, people perceive that as being sort of a more trusted thing. This is just not a guy who's spouting an opinion. This is somebody who's sort of entrenched in this activist community. Another thing is if they have education and experience related to the issue area. So George Clooney, for example, became very educated about issues in the Sudan, actually went there rather surreptitiously, ended up being interviewed by Congress. That kind of knowledge that you can build up. Angelina Jolie is a great example, but she also is affiliated with the United Nations. Ben Affleck became very familiar with the Congo. And so, you know, if they inform themselves on a single issue and become really expert at that, then they tend to have more credibility. And the other thing is sort of an identity association. If they're associated with an issue that's affiliated with an identity they have, then they're more credible. And a great example of this, based on my research, is Elton John. Like Elton John is extremely credible, more credible on the issue of LGBTQ rights than nearly any politician you can name, in part because of his own orientation. So The first is like, the fact that they can raise consciousness about an issues through the media. The second one is they're potentially more credible than politicians, and the third one is they can also be persuasive, and that also depends on the issue. So um, I will say that they aren't equally persuasive on all issues. So if there are issues that where people's opinions are yet to be formed, then they're more likely to be persuaded on those particular issues. On the other hand, if you have things you might refer to as wedge issues, issues where people are dug in, they're not nearly as influential on that. And in fact, it's funny, I was in an interview here recently where people say, so what difference do celebrities make as far as changing people's attitudes about the vaccine? And my answer was none at all. Because just like they're not going to convince people if you're a gun nut to lay down your guns or to change your mind on abortion, I think at this particular moment in time, they're not going to be influential in terms of vaccines either. And I could tell you why in a little bit, but like I said, I probably talk too much and I should shut up.
Well, I think that's interesting. So, in a way, where you're saying that celebrity isn't going to sway people to be pro or anti vaccine, but if you are already pro or anti vaccine, you can be retweeting and promoting that celebrity who's echoing your own thoughts on these kind of wedge issues.
Exactly. I mean, the vaccine issue is one that has become a wedge issue in the United States. I mean, Sophie was asking, like, why is it that so many people are not vaccinated right now? Well, it's because it's become a cultural issue and a wedge issue. If you look at the highest group of vaccinated people in the United States right now, they're Democrats. The second to lowest vaccinated number are Republicans, and they have only a slightly higher vaccination rate than the uninsured. So that just gives you an idea of sort of where people are in terms of the extremities of these issues. So whether or not you're vaccinated closely aligns with the way you vote. So if Nicki Minaj comes out and says some outrageous things about the vaccine, now of course you can maybe talk about Nicki Minaj's credibility, but chances are you're going to amplify her attitude through your own attitude. So if Nicki Minaj is anti-vax, then and you're already anti-vax, then good on her, right? And if you're pro-vaccination, then you're going to say she's irresponsible. Why is she saying that? So it's what we're seeing now, I think, particularly on vaccines, is that people are perceiving celebrities based on their own perspectives and then amplifying those positions.
It's fascinating because we've had so many vaccines in our country's history and the history of the world, right? And I don't know how many people realize, but none of those vaccines for measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, any of those very well known diseases that are pretty much eradicated, polio, none of them had the efficacy rate of the COVID 19 vaccines of today. But people are much more skeptical about the COVID vaccines now than they were of any of those vaccines in the past. I think you touch on a good point, Dr. Harvey, about amplification. So if someone has a doubt, is doubtful about the efficacy or safety of a vaccine, and then they hear someone a celebrity or someone who's well known or famous who they admire um, putting words to their own doubt, amplifying their own voice, now they're even more confident in their doubt that, oh, I thought that there was something wrong with that vaccine, but yeah, now I really think there's something wrong with that vaccine because Nicki Minaj or Jim Carrey or whoever said so. And I'm so fascinated by that fact. Like, how is it that that person's opinion is more important than your own physician or the scientists who actually discovered the mRNA vaccines or worked on it, or the people who actually did the work? Is it because of the way celebrities speak? Is it because they're easier to understand or more relatable than scientists or more relatable than physicians? Do you think that's part of it?
It might be. I think there's two pieces to this. I think one of them is simply the aspirational piece that I described before, that you're sort of living vicariously through them and they're your friend and that kind of thing. And they're a very famous, very popular, very influential friend, and you're just sort of looking at that. Having said that, the other point about are they a better spokesperson? That really was the original thing that drew me into this research. And it's actually a question that I don't think has been answered in a satisfactory way in the academic literature, and it's something I'd like to do some more research on because, see, I'm a musician too, and I have always been fascinated with how music affects people's attitudes and emotions and things like that. And musicians have been extremely influential through their art in terms of political attitudes. But, I mean, it's funny. An interviewer asked me a question before about celebrities, like, you know, is a celebrity more effective when they're selling a product on TV, or some, because nowadays you see a lot of, or you don't see celebrities at all. You might see a car commercial and you just hear the voice of the celebrity and you don't necessarily identify with them. you know One would suggest that the celebrity's face sells the product. The other one suggests that I don't know who the celebrity is, but maybe they're just really, really good at vocal delivery, and that's their craft, and that's their art, and that's the way it works. I don't have a great answer to that, but I will say that celebrities are notoriously horrible at selling products, even though we use them over and over again. They have about a 1 out of 3 um, success rate. Um, but when it works great. So it's worse than hit and miss, I think, really, in terms of that. You have to identify with the right sort of product and the right sort of person. There was a famous study that came out several years ago, um, about whether or not Jessica Simpson could hypothetically sell any kind of product. And so they did an experiment, basically, where they had Jessica Simpson, to an experimental group, sell perfume and sell pocket knives. And as you might imagine, she's very good at selling perfume and she's horrible at selling pocket knives. So it depends. Another thing that you mentioned
Right.
that I think might be worth keeping in mind, as far as the vaccines as a wedge issue, there's an article that came out recently, and it's a historical fact, but it's just an interesting thing to revisit, is that the polio vaccine came out in the 1950s. And at that time, it wasn't politicized, right? Of course, our vaccine, the COVID vaccine, become very politicized. However, they were very concerned because they had so few young people willing to take the vaccine. And Elvis Presley volunteered to get vaxed in front of a camera, and of course, he was the newest, hottest thing in 1956, and really had a huge impact in terms of getting massive numbers of young people to get the vaccine.
That's what we do.
I,
We need to.
We just bring Elvis back from the dead? That'd be a great idea.
well, I
Elvis
think
was
that well, Biden tried something similar, right? Because he did a outreach to influencers on Instagram and TikTok, and he had them do a vaccine campaign and even had them show pictures of themselves getting vaccinated and things. And I don't think it was very successful. It kind of just disappeared. We didn't talk about it. So, but it is interesting, um, when you look at a celebrity, let's say like Jenny McCarthy, who was anti-vax before it was cool to be anti-vax. So when she's trying to rally people up, was that before this became a wedge issue, Dr. Harvey, or did she really have no input in whether people were becoming anti-vaxxers at that
Wait, wait,
time?
wait. Before Dr. Harvey, you answer, I have to put a cherry on that phrase that Taya just said. Cool to be anti-vax. I don't know what are we in a time warp or a why is this a trend or a political event or we're talking about healthcare. How did all of this get intertwined? I'm still flabbergasted by the whole thing.
Well, I can give you some insights on that. I think the part of the problem is that a lot of our politics have been woven into sort of what I would call sort of elite versus anti-elite culture. Okay, so intellectualism is associated with elitism, and so if you're a person who is less educated and maybe you don't value education in the same way, and then you have politicians then summarily sort of saying that those so-called experts don't really know what they're talking about. I remember Bill Clinton on the campaign trail in the 1990s. He was awesome at this. He would go out there and sort of talk real serious and everything about using his real smart voice. And then he'd go out into a group in Arkansas. He'd be like, well, I don't know nothing about nothing. I'll tell you some good common country sense. And, people respond to that kind of stuff. And he was able to relate not just to people who were educated, but to people who were uneducated and pull both sides of that. But nowadays, you have certain people who are really kind of turning intellectuals into people to be mistrusted, and that I don't need a degree, I don't need to be educated, and I'm as smart as anybody else. It's kind of a democratization of knowledge, if you will, as opposed to um, having credentials based upon what you know and what you're able to learn. It's sort of like my opinion's as good as anybody's, and I'm smart enough, so maybe I don't need those people. I mean, I know it's crazy, but there's a very, very strong strand of anti-intellectualism going on in the United States now, and quite honestly, throughout our history, it's been a pretty strong cultural urge.
And when we look at the celebrity pool to different, to positive or negative, pro vax or anti vax, like Jenny McCarthy's been on this, it's a campaign, I guess, for a while now. Um, but are there positive things? I know you mentioned Elvis. Are there still positives that we can get from some celebrity input like that, or is this issue just, like you said, a wedge issue? So we're just going to attach to the celebrities that we most connect with their opinions on, and so like what Biden did with the influencers, that was just wasted efforts. Is I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult thing to say. I mean, I would say in general, celebrities have a great opportunity to do positive things. Now, whether or not it's going to be positive things on vaccines, that remains to be seen. And I think if there's a positive thing really to be said, it's that, you have people who have, tremendous power with their voices who, if they're behind a good cause, they have the opportunity to shine a light on that cause. And traditionally speaking, and by traditionally, gosh, I mean, we're not talking a really, really long time, but as far as, since people have really been paying more attention to celebrities and stuff in their political opinions, I think it's been more that way, where you'll have celebrity activists going out there and trying to attract attention and working at it. And it's never been an easy thing. I mean, even when something's not a wedge issue, a celebrity can't just necessarily speak and then all of a sudden change a policy or change people's minds. And these people, like, if you ask them why they do what they do, they have a conscience. They feel like they have an obligation to speak up, and that's that. As to whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea, if somebody like Joe Biden says, "Hey, let's see how many pictures we can get of people getting the vaccine and see if we influence people." I mean, if I was Biden, I'd do the same thing, because it doesn't hurt to try, right? If your goal is to try to reach as many people, maybe it influenced some people. It's not, none of these things are all or nothing, and persuasion isn't something that just happens overnight. Um, but I will say that there are enough anti-vaxxers out there who are also influential that that's going on too. And I think that's a much, much more troubling trend, not just in vaccines, but in just sort of the spread of disinformation through social media. If you can have anybody come out and say things um, that are not true, and if it plays upon people's fears, it's going to spread like wildfire, whether it's a celebrity or not. If it's a celebrity, then that just sort of amplifies it even more.
And And do you see that a correlation? You mentioned media. Is there a correlation between media coverage and the impact that celebrity is going to have, um, I guess,
Yes.
on the topic?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's true discreetly, but it's also true historically, right? Whenever, I mean, based on my research in my book, um, the more, I mean, if a celebrity says something, they're going to get a lot more attention than a politician most of the time, particularly if it's on a political issue, because you know most celebrities aren't prone to go out and make political comments all the time. Politicians are, so they stand out. And so that's maybe not totally unusual nowadays, but it's interesting. But part of that also is just sort of like the way that the media has evolved essentially over the past 50 some years. It used to be like 1940s, 1950s, celebrities would say very little in terms of political things, and in part because they had these morality clauses in their contract where if they spoke out, then they could just have their contract canceled by a movie studio or a record company or whatever. It isn't until the 1960s where the Beatles start getting a little bit more vocal about political issues. I mean, Bob Dylan sort of came before them, but the Beatles were like the biggest thing on the planet for a while. They could do things like say, you know what, I'm not going to play at that venue in the South if it's a segregated audience. And so these kinds of things changed because it was economic and they had so much power, changed different attitudes and changed the way that people started behaving. And then musicians sort of started feeling like, look, we have a little bit more freedom because, we have a bit more economic power to do so. And really, the hardest ones have been actors and athletes. Actors by the late 1960s, early 1970s weren't part of the old studio system anymore. And athletes still are highly constrained by their contracts. And so, you know, all I have to do is say Colin Kaepernick, and I think you know what I'm talking about. It's difficult. It's much more difficult for athletes based on the structure of their sport and their contracts to be able to say anything at all. But in the meantime, right, you've got the media changing like crazy. By the time you hit the 1980s, you got 24-hour uh, coverage through CNN. And then sooner or later, you get the internet and social media, and everybody's looking to fill time. And what are you going to fill time with, particularly if you want to sell advertisements or if you want to sell clicks, right? You're going to have some celebrity up there as much as you possibly can. And so part of it is that celebrities have been empowered to say more, they've been able to say more. And part of it also is that the media wants them to say more because it's good for their bottom line.
You know, I can understand why people wouldn't believe politicians because they would think, okay, this politician is just saying that to be reelected or to increase their approval rate, right? Um, and maybe you could say the same thing about a celebrity. They're trying to increase their popularity, increase their record sales or their ticket sales, increase popularity to draw a larger crowd to their venues, to their events, performances, what have you. But what do people think about healthcare professionals, scientists? Like, what do scientists have to gain by promoting a vaccine or a medication? If it's a CEO of the company who's manufacturing it, then I can understand that too. There's that bias, but even healthcare workers are not trusted, and I don't understand what people think um, they're getting out of this, the promotion of the vaccine or these drugs, other than trying to promote health or wellness or improvement, right? Because we definitely have seen a lot of sick people, a lot of death, right, in the past 2 years. But somehow there's still a mistrust about the treatment or prevention. I'm wondering, what is that feeling? Why do people mistrust scientists more than the celebrities or politicians who actually have something to gain, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And the answer is that you tell the truth, and therefore you're not going to unnecessarily engage in fear mongering, right? What healthcare professionals are doing, which is akin to what I'm doing, honestly, as a professor as well, is you're seeking the truth and you're trying to benefit society and you're trying to heal people and you're trying to make things better. And you're using science in a way to try to make that happen, to try to discover that. And so the kinds of things that we would think would be irresponsible, other people have no problem going out and saying and doing those things. So one answer honestly is just some people are willing to play upon people's fear, and if it advances their cause, or if it's just what they think, they're going to say that. And the other answer, and I, no offense intended here, but celebrities are a whole lot sexier than we are, now, except for maybe Dr. Fauci. Now, Dr. Fauci actually, I guess, was called like the sexiest man alive by the Guardian newspaper. People magazine thought about nominating him as sexiest man alive. I mean, my man Paul Rudd, I guess, beat him out, right? I actually went to high school with Paul Rudd. That's another story. But so yeah, Fauci. All you have to do is like type in sexy Fauci online, and there's all sorts of awesome memes about him and stuff like that, right? Um, but still, even sexy Fauci can't sell it because, like I said, we're way too politicized on this issue. And that's another interesting point, is that politicians, you see, I systematically separate politicians from celebrities, because celebrities I just assume are going to be people who are entertainment. And to your point, they don't have a self-interest in getting reelected. And that's one reason why they tend to be trusted more, right? But then that also sort of brings up, we haven't said talked about the Donald yet, right? I mean, Donald Trump was essentially primarily a celebrity. I mean, he was also a kind of a rich dude that, liked to gain a lot of attention, but the gaining a lot of attention was sort of the celebrity side of what he was doing. And I think people tended to perceive Donald Trump the same way as they see many celebrities. It's like, well, he's never had the political experience before. He's just speaking his mind. I don't know. He's not a politician. Maybe I'll trust that guy. And so, for better or worse, maybe worse, you know, um, he was able to exploit, I think, that opportunity. And so that's the kind of pattern sometimes that you see um, in this kind of celebrity politician dichotomy.
It's really interesting. We did have a question from the audience about just inconsistent message. Someone had said, well, they feel, was it, you know, it was it untrusting the scientists, or was it the fact that the government wasn't on the same page when they sent the message? And I think that kind of can go back to your point about politics and how politics started to play a role in the CDC and in the FDA and in all of these government areas where they're supposed to be thinking of our health and not politics. I don't know if either of you had a comment on that.
Yeah, if you're asking me, I think that's a huge problem, and it's a huge issue. I mean, you know, if and I'm speaking hypothetically, of course, here, but I would argue that if Donald Trump in January or February of 2020 had come out and said, this is a serious issue and we need to be concerned about this and we need to wear masks and so on, and was on the same page as the Democrats on all of this stuff, then, honestly, we wouldn't have a wedge issue at this point. And there, there wouldn't be the politicization of the CDC at this point, because so much of what he was trying to do anyway during that time period was you know perceived, at least, as brazenly political, so much so that many of the CDC were complaining about it. And when you start trying to treat an organization, a government institution that isn't an elected institution, that is trying to promote public health, and you sort of yank them into the middle of electoral politics, then it's going to dirty them up. And I think that's kind of what happened.
That's a perfect explanation. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And then we have the general public who is getting mixed messages. Who do they trust? Right?
Yeah, the CDC was one of the most trusted institutions in the United States prior to 2020. And if you're going to start blaming your scientists for all the problems that you've got, then science is going to be in trouble.
Exactly. And now that we see things heading toward that negative realm where people are not trusting the CDC, or they are not trusting scientists, they think, the vaccine is a hoax. What can we do? Is there a way to turn the ship around? Like, how do we change this?
We got to get more sexy Faucis out there.
Who are attractive or relatable or
See, that's the thing. I hate my answer, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that, you could get celebrities to promote what the CDC has to say, or you could get sexy scientists. I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous, but like the research to me suggests that that kind of thing might make a difference, but only somewhat, right? Because is really, I joke a little bit about that, right? Maybe a lot. But the fact is that this still remains a wedge issue. And if I absolutely hate to say this, but I don't think you're going to get more people vaccinated until people are less polarized about their politics. So I think you have to solve the political problem before you solve the public health problem. Because as long as people are listening to certain news outlets that are going to tell them over and over again that the vaccine's a hoax, or, it causes infertility, or you name it, right? I mean, they're going to believe that and not the scientists. And so you have to figure out, like, I mean, how are you going to address the disinformation problem, which feeds into the divisive politics? How are you going to get politicians from both sides to not exploit that divide for their own political ends? And, you know, I think that's a really, really tall order. If you're by asking that question, you're not asking me, how to get more people vaccinated. You're actually asking me, how do we solve what ails us in this country? And I've got some opinions about that, but I don't have really good solutions.
Thank you for that, Dr. Harvey. I think I'm going to reset the room really quick because we have a few new people who have joined us. We are talking with PhD Mark Harvey, who has written a book on celebrity influence. And we were discussing particularly the influence of celebrity on pandemic response and if they have an influence on people's choices. Uh, Something else I would like to ask, if an audience member brought this up and they wanted to ask you if they had brought in doctors or healthcare workers earlier in this conversation, do you think that things would have changed or been different if Donald Trump had immediately brought in doctors or immediately turned it to other professionals in the healthcare industry? Would that conversation then be different now?
Yes, I believe it would, because there are people out there that, absolutely love Donald Trump and, trust him and think he's great. And if he had displayed trust in uh, the medical scientific community, um, I really don't think that we'd be in the same place, because I mean, there's very, very little difference in terms of medical scientific opinions about what COVID is, how harmful it is, what it does, and what you should do about it in terms of vaccination. I mean, you turn over the stage to the scientists, and they're pretty much, I mean, scientists debate about a lot of stuff, but this particular thing, I think it would be pretty obvious. And then it wouldn't be a wedge issue, it wouldn't be a political issue, it would be a public health issue. And that's really the way it should be. I mean, it's not like here's another example. It's not a medical example, right? But let's say a hurricane hits someplace, right? You generally get bipartisan support to take a lot of money and try to deal with that thing so these people get back on their feet. And there's not a lot of debate about it. It's like, let's go take care of those people. Sometimes you get a little bit of afterwards discussion about, like, well, maybe we shouldn't spend so much and blah blah blah, but there's no debate. this issue was just really weird in that people on the right decided to politicize it, and that meant that whoever your experts were not going to be trusted.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because I was just reading today about how the Ukraine issue, for example, right now is something that we all agree on. Both Republicans and Democrats believe that the Ukraine should be or should remain an independent country, and no one's really talking about how we agree on that. But it's something that could actually bring both sides together, that agreement. But it is interesting that they chose to separate us on this vaccine issue. I'll pass it to Sophie. I think Sophie had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about your book, actually, Dr. Harvey.
Sounds great. Well, I feel like I've been talking a lot about it, even though this was published before the pandemic. So, like, there's very little discussion about vaccines and such. I mean, who would have guessed, right? But yeah, I mean, the book basically is structured in based on those three things that I basically said were it cause celebrities to be influential. You know, one being that they're good at getting people to spotlighting issues in the media, that they are credible, even more credible than politicians, and that they're highly persuasive. And I mean, I could tell you a little bit about how I gathered my data or how I did my research, but I also don't want to necessarily bore your audience. But if you got more questions for me, I'd be happy to help or happy to talk to you about it.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you. Maybe some of the audience members have questions about how you gathered that research. Um, we'll go to Thimby. Thimby, did you have a question for Dr. Harvey?
Tembi. No,
Thimby?
not really. Not yet. I was like, the conversation has been going so smoothly. Every time I have a question, it gets answered.
Thank you, Thimby. Maru, did you have a question for Dr. Harvey?
Oops, sorry, having technical difficulties. No, I'm good. I just agree. I think if Dr. Donald Trump had brought in doctors, local people who would be more in the, how do I say it, relatable to the public, it would have made a difference. I truly believe in that.
I agree. And I feel like now there's no boundary of overstepping. I know you mentioned previously that celebrities had contracts or athletes have certain things they have to abide by per contract. They can't act out in certain ways. So now those consequences aren't in place anymore. Um, I guess people just don't know when to draw the line. Do you have an opinion on that, Dr. Harvey? How do we get celebrities to know how to draw a line?
If by draw a line you mean have they gone too far, have they said too much, have they, and I think the answer is that sometimes the best of us don't know when to draw a line. And I would also say that the nature of social media has changed where that line is. So let me give you an example. All right. In the early 1970s, Elvis Presley meets with Richard Nixon, shakes his hand. There's a famous photo about it. He's talking about his concern about the counterculture and drugs and stuff like that. And he says, "Hey, work, I'll work to sort of like help you out with this, right?" But the interesting thing about this photograph didn't come out until the late 1980s because Nixon didn't want anybody to know he was taking advice from a celebrity, and Elvis thought that if he was seen with Nixon, then that would decrease his own credibility as well. And so that didn't come out till much, much later. It's not until the 1990s where you see a whole lot more celebrities. And again, I think that's due in part to the changing nature of um, cable television and the internet and social media. But I would say even just since the last election cycle, or even maybe 2016 is probably a good sort of point to bring this up, is that because our politics have become so divisive, it's been very, very difficult for celebrities to not take sides. I mean, like when the Beatles came out and said certain things, or people in the 1960s, or even U2 in the 80s and 90s. It's like that didn't help their popularity, right? It's like people in the South were like burning Beatles albums and stuff because they said certain things. Um, but nowadays, it's like you almost have to say something. And a great example of this is Taylor Swift, right? Taylor Swift famously does not go to the Women's March in January 2017 after Donald Trump is elected. And she's castigated by fans for it. And eventually she ends up sort of changing her orientation to the point where she starts supporting political candidates and makes herself, more explicitly political. And so now a lot of celebrities are thinking about, is politics part of my brand? Like, do I have to engage in some way politically in order to prove to my audience that I'm a more authentic person? And I'm not saying that Taylor Swift necessarily is, curating her image in quite that way, but I think it'd be silly to assume that she doesn't. I mean, I curate my image on Facebook and LinkedIn and so on, right? Celebrities do this. And so, you know, being political and saying certain things are, a lot more normal for celebrities nowadays, and in fact, absolutely accepted. So if you get to the question about crossing a line and going too far, well, I mean, look, a lot of people think that some of these people aren't going far enough, and the money suggests maybe they should keep talking.
It's like they can't win. you know they don't say anything, then they're branded as unfeeling or unempathetic, and then if they actually reveal their opinion, now they're crossing a line. So they can't win, and they don't have all of the information either, right? So they're working with what they know, and their own feelings and their own opinions as well. They're human just like anyone else. And I think this new brand of pressure that the public puts on them is really, um, it's almost ridiculous how we cannot separate our celebrity opinions from, healthcare opinions, from politicians' opinions. Why would you go to your butcher for, an EKG, or would you go to your dog walker to paint your house, or why are we doing this? I feel like it's a universal thing. It's a very funny question.
Yeah, to that point, I'll just share this anecdote, right? So I've got a couple of kids, and the pediatrician's name is Jennifer. We call her Dr. Jennifer, right? And so when our kids were very small, she was very specific to tell us, like, look, we ought to really have our kids vaccinated. And she says, you can listen to Jenny McCarthy or you can listen to Dr. Jenny. Which one do you trust? And hey, I'm
Absolutely.
sorry, man. I was with Dr. Jenny.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I think, we all have to kind of put this on ourselves. Like, who are we going to listen to? Are we going to let Jennifer McCarthy make our healthcare decisions? It's a bit wild. Um, I see we have Noel and Dipti join us. Noel, did you have a question?
I did have a question. Thank you, Taya. Uh, Dr. Harvey, I have my question is a little bit of what you've talked about, but I want to go down looking at your bio, your curated bio, by the way. I admire. I have a passion for education, but I'm not an educator, and I want to go into the uh, ethics and leadership and sort of political science conversation, and I'll tell you what my thinking is. So as a as a preamble. When COVID appeared in the United States, which is just over 2 years ago, um, Dr. Fauci, now celebrity Dr. Fauci, was very comfortable in telling Americans that it wasn't a big deal and we don't need a mask. I am an entrepreneur. I have to make decisions every day, some good ones and some bad ones, and I sort of have to live by it. I start reading my Newsday, reading the South China Post, and I worked to the National in the UAE, the Financial Times, the New York Times, and finally my favorite newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. And I basically curate out of those five newspapers what is real. And I'm looking at the pictures, which ironically on my Facebook today was a picture of an individual putting a patient on a gurney, and they had a full hazmat suit, and they were pushing them away, like, go away. And I said, I don't believe Dr. Fauci, which I had never heard of him. Obviously, I know the CDC. I believe what's on the ground. And I started, I told my son who works with me, I said, start buying masks and all kinds of things because we've got something that the Chinese are very scared about. So the question is, um, back to ethics and things like that. I think that a lot of Americans, including myself, never believed the word that came out of them, only because I sort of believe the philosophy if you lie in the small, you're going to lie in the big. So back to the ethics of political. Do you think that was, in hindsight, a mistake? Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the very fact that, you'd think that, maybe Fauci wouldn't necessarily be telling the truth is an interesting point because that was never the way that I took it. And I heard that message too, right? At first, like I was like, well, I was one of the people like, well, they say we don't need masks, and I maybe didn't believe it 100%, but I just sort of like tried to stay in and not go peak places. I think that message that you don't need a mask lasted about a week or maybe 2 weeks. I mean, I'd have to check in on that, but he really did an about face pretty fast. And I think that, they were trying not to panic people. Maybe they were even being pressured by the administration. I mean, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of that sort of stuff going on, but it didn't take long before the CDC turns around and says, no, you all need to mask. And so I'm not sure that this is a case of, you know, Fauci coming out and lying to anybody nearly as much as, they're trying to deal with a lot of different data and figure out how to take it in and how to handle that. I mean, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I tend to think that the people working at the CDC are probably a lot like the people working with me at my university. And like personally, I don't have a political axe to grind. I may have some opinions. I'm a political scientist, but like I'm going to go where the facts are going to lead me. And, if it leads me one direction, that's fine. If it leads me another direction, that's fine. But I'm not here to necessarily change people's minds. I'm here to give people information. And when I give you what I think is factual information now, and then that information gets updated or changed, then I'm going to come out and do that. Just like in newspapers when they make a mistake and they redact it. Maybe they should do more to draw attention to that redaction. But that's a problem even among those of us who are try to adhere to the scientific method as much as we possibly can, and he's a scientist.
But
So
Professor Harvey, I thought he was quoted saying that he was very concerned about Americans going out there and using up the supply of PPE, and I think the media said I'm not going to use the word white lie, but it was something for a good cause. I'm pretty sure that's part of the record. Does anybody remember that?
I
I,
do.
I don't remember the details myself on that, but go on.
Well, I remember part of what you're referring to Noel, and I think that was part of the fear is that there was going to be because at that time, if you remember, there was no toilet paper, for example, in the stores, and I think they were very nervous that people were going to go out and buy all of these protection gear when we needed the healthcare workers to have access to those things. So I do remember that being an issue at that time.
The picture that I put in the PTR is dated on my Facebook, um, January 25th, and I basically January 5th, 2000. I said, I'm sorry, 2020. I said I nominate this for the picture of the year, um, and it was just scary that I said we're gonna if this started in Wuhan and China's telling their people to dress up like this, then they know, they have information that we don't have. So, again, CEOs have to make these decisions. I said, I'm going to go with what I see versus what I hear. And I could not believe, I put it on my Facebook today, I could not believe how accurate, by circumstance, this picture proved to be on January 25th, 2020.
Yeah, it's a good point, Noel, that the distribution of information wasn't set in place. It didn't seem like there was really a plan for communicating during a pandemic or how to clearly send messages during a pandemic, and it was a little bit chaotic. If it still feels chaotic in a way, because each media outlet presents from a different, very biased perspective. I don't know, Dr. Harvey, if you have any feedback on the media and how they portray information. Some are very, you know, are more positive response, and then others were telling people not to respond. So I think people felt confused depending on which media outlet, and not everyone is like Noel, where they evaluate 5 different sources of media. They're usually sticking with one source.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think curating from many sources is really good, and reliable sources as well. Like I have respect for all of the sources that you listed before, and I think you came to what was ultimately a good decision at that point. Um, so yeah, I agree.
I really would love to get your take on cancel culture, but I'll move on to Dipty. Dipty, did you have a comment before I ask about cancel culture?
uh, Relevant. No, I just wanted to say hello and thank you. This is a fascinating subject. Dr. Harvey, thanks. You guys are doing great. This is a um, cool segue. And I'm here to listen and just absorb all this. But I just want to say, Dr. Harvey, I'm just like, I swooned when you said that Paul Rudd that intimately. So thanks for sharing that little tidbit also. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I swoon too.
Thank you, Al, for joining us on stage. Did you have a question for Dr. Harvey?
A little bit more of a comment. By the way, I'm using a new audio setup. Can you guys hear me okay?
You sound a little far away. If you could speak a little louder.
Okay. Um, first, I think, we shouldn't underestimate the effect of confirmation bias on a lot of the vaccine hesitancy. And, for those of us in the audience that aren't scientists, confirmation bias is when you see something or some evidence and it seems to confirm what you already believe. So you're going to take that evidence as very, very high quality evidence to confirm that you either believe or don't believe in the vaccine. And as physicians and scientists, and I'm a physician by trade, we kind of are taught to recognize that in ourselves, and so the public is not. And so I think that what's happening is, when a celebrity comes out and says, I'm against this vaccine, if you already have an inkling that you're kind of against the vaccine, you're going to believe that celebrity a lot more than those physicians and scientists. And I think that that's kind of created just a subset of people that are not interested at all in getting the vaccine. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I worked for a company this year that helped to coordinate vaccine administration in 10 states. We gave 2 million vaccines in the different states and took over a number of stadiums, including Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles, to give vaccines. And initially, when we started the operation, there people were lining up to get the vaccine. And in fact, we were only allowed to give the vaccine to people over 65 years of age initially, and those with a lot of chronic health problems. And we had people waiting at our sites for extra vaccine, that didn't fit that criteria. And as time went on and more people got vaccinated, we kind of came up against a certain percentage of the population that just, no matter what, did not want the vaccine. And then we started to, try and give incentives to get it. We even did in other states, like we'll give you tickets to baseball games, if you go and get the vaccine, or we did shot for shots, where we give you a shot of alcohol if you got the shot. And it was amazing how ineffective some of those were. Once we got down to a percentage of the population, a lot of people, everybody that had been vaccinated that wanted to get vaccinated, and now there was, a percentage of the population that just didn't want it.
I think that's a fascinating point. Thank you for bringing uh, that to us. And, that's kind of where we're at, right? Like, I think the people that want to get vaccinated or are following the science have already been vaccinated, um, and trying to convince the other people in our population, it's kind of an impossibility. Do you think, Dr. Harvey, that there is hope in being able to convince those people that remain unvaccinated?
Yeah, confirmation bias is an excellent way to describe what I've been talking about all along when I basically said that, are they going to make any difference in terms of changing attitudes? And on this particular issue, I really don't think that they make that much difference. Like I said before, Nicki Minaj comes out and says that she's a vax or an anti-vaxxer. It's just going to make the anti-vaxxers say, oh, yeah, it's exactly, that's it. And the people who are pro-vax say that she's irresponsible. And so, yeah, I don't see a lot of movement. And to kind of reiterate a point that I was saying before, I mean, I really hate to say this, I want to approach this whole question as a healthcare, public health kind of issue. But because it is a political issue, we're not going to get more people vaccinated probably until we solve some of our problems with disinformation, information sources, and political polarization. And unfortunately, that means that we can't probably we we certainly can't solve this problem as fast as we could have if we were all on the same page to begin with. And it didn't have to go this way, it's the way it did go.
Can I ask something quickly? Did you guys touch base in regards to is it Djokovic, who's the tennis player, and the politics surrounding his anti-vax status or anything like that? Has he been mentioned at all?
No.
No, we haven't talked about him yet, but I do think that's an interesting case. I mean, it also goes to show how different countries are responding to this problem differently. Like in Australia, the whole assumption is that, you know, everybody should be following these rules. And if you're not following the rules, then you really shouldn't be here and you shouldn't be a part of this. If it were the other way around, coming to the United States, I mean, there'd be plenty of support for him to like go around, not wear a mask, be vaccinated, not be vaccinated. I mean, um, granted, technically, for most people, if they're a foreign national, they're supposed to get vaccinated coming into the United States. But I'm just saying, in terms of attitudes, there would be there'd be a lot more support for him.
And thank you so much for bringing that up, Dipti. That was something that I did want to mention earlier and forgot. And I do want to touch on the whole idea of the cancel culture with different celebrities. If it's interesting where society will draw the line. And, and I was wondering if you had any perspective on that, on why some celebrities seem to be consistent in even negative messaging, but we forgive them over and over again. And then there are some celebrities in which one time and they're done, they're on the canceled list and their career's over. Why is that? Why is there any pattern to that choice, I guess?
I think that's an interesting question, and I have to say honestly, I would be speculating. I don't really have enough data to probably give you a real answer to that question. I mean, personally speaking, like I think that eh, it's something that I struggle with because when I see a celebrity and they've done something that's really, really horrible, it kind of sours me on whatever art they're associated with, right? Like maybe I don't want to listen to their music, or maybe I don't want to watch them in a movie or whatever. But at the same time, I also think that there needs to be room in our politics and in our ethics for forgiveness. And so figuring out how we get to a point where we can forgive people, I think that's an important thing too. I mean, I think that there's potentially a lot of art and talent lost because we can't get over certain things. And I'm not exactly sure how to get there, right? Because I mean, I think about some of the horrible things done by some people, and I'm like, oh man, I don't even know if I could forgive that. That's super hard. And then if they come up and they say they're sorry, well, is sorry good enough? Well, maybe it needs to be good enough. I don't know. I mean, I think I look at it more from an ethical standpoint as opposed to a social scientific standpoint because I don't really have the data on it. But I do think it's something that we need to think a little bit about very carefully about who we're excluding and why we're excluding them.
Yes, definitely. I think, you mentioned not wanting to listen to music. Recently Eric Clapton has been quite vocal in his anti vaccine, but also I think some racist stuff has come out around his relationships with other musicians. And so it's just, it seems like one negativity will come out and then a whole flood of other accusations start to appear. Uh, and it's kind of tainted his career for me at this moment.
Yeah, I mean Clapton actually is one that I was specifically thinking about because I love a lot of Clapton's music, and I'm having a hard time listening to him right now. Now maybe that will change, but yeah, and as far as Clapton's concerned too, I mean some of the racist stuff that you've heard, I think it goes back to an incident in the 1970s where he made some remarks, and I believe he was super high on heroin at the time and probably not thinking very straight. I don't know about anything recently, but I will say, yeah, he's come out and said some pretty obnoxious things in terms of vaccinations. So again, like I said, it's always a question about like, how far back do you want to go, and what do you want to forgive? And I know at least he's expressed contrition for those remarks that he expressed back in the 1970s. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Now there's definitely a record. We keep records with the tweets and everything of what people say, but back in the 70s, I guess it's just hearsay. Um, well, thank you very much for your time tonight, Dr. Harvey. I'm going to ask the audience one more time if they have any questions. This is your last chance. Otherwise, I will go around to everyone on the stage that's left up here on the panel, and we'll just give final thoughts. And then we'll close with you, Dr. Harvey. So I'll pass it to Sophie first for her final thoughts. Sophie?
Yeah, thanks, Taya. Wow, what a great room. You made me really think, which I appreciate. There are really different perspectives that I hadn't considered before. And I think we're gonna have to, we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go thinking about this, but I have some ideas, and I think others have some ideas too. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Harvey. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll come again. This was great.
Thank you, Sophie. And Dipti, did you have final words?
No, thank you. Excellent job as always. Dr. Harvey, welcome. We hope to see you around. And thanks everybody for excellent effort. Have a great night.
Thank you. And Noel.
Um, no, I don't have much to say other than thank you, Dr. Harvey. You could be a star here. I enjoyed your conversation. Taya and Sophie, great room, great content. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. And Al, did you have any final thoughts?
No, I learned a lot during this. I really appreciate you coming to talk. I think that we have a long way to go. And, what I've learned so far is the challenge is kind of how to how to get to the people that are more hesitant about getting the vaccine, and how to create kind of a culture that's not so divisive politically. I've listened to a number of speakers in my economic club that I attend, and they talked about just how divisive we used to be, or that we are now. And it used to be that the nightly news was a 20-minute summary of what's going on, and now with the 24-hour news cycle, everybody's opinion is shared, and that includes the celebrities. So I think this is an important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. And I will pass it to you, Dr. Harvey, to close us out for tonight.
Great. Well, first of all, let me say it was an absolute pleasure spending time with all of you, and I thank you for listening to me. It's always sort of a humbling experience whenever people ask me to come around and I get to talk, and that's lots of fun. I'd be happy to come back anytime. So, you want me to come back and talk some more about that or anything really you like, um, I'd be happy to do it. And as far as the topic is concerned, I'll just close by saying I really think this is an important issue. This whole issue of the way that celebrities affect the way that we think. I mean, it was a weird thing when I started my research several years ago. It was all I could do to get anybody to believe that this mattered whatsoever. Yeah, I started researching this stuff in, you know, 2012, 2010, I don't know, maybe before that. And nearly every scientist professor who, talked to me was like, why are you doing that? And I look around right now and I'm thinking it's extremely important. If you think about the amplification of misinformation and the way that, you know, influencers can potentially change attitudes, maybe not on this particular issue. It's I think it's extremely important. And my one regret really is that I'm not able to answer better I don't have better data to answer some of the questions that you have, and that I can't be as optimistic as I would normally like to be. I mean, I do believe in people. I believe in hope, and I do believe that, there are ways to solve problems. And I certainly hope that this pandemic is something that can be solved, that maybe sooner or later more people will be vaccinated and we'll see a light at the end of the tunnel and everything. But I also have to say that this particular issue illustrates how sort of difficult our politics are right now. And if we can't come together on something that threatens all of us, then I think it's a kind of a scary moment for our society and our democracy.
Thank you. I agree, Dr. Harvey. It's definitely become such a divisive topic in society. And I would like to share your book with everyone. If you could please remind everyone where they can find your book and then also how to follow you on socials.
Absolutely. Okay, so my book, it's called Celebrity Influence: Politics, Persuasion, and Issue-Based Advocacy. And it's probably available through just about any bookseller. I mean, you certainly can get on Amazon and get copies of it like that if that's your preferred thing. But it's there are lots of places I know online anyway that sell it, and it shouldn't be too difficult to find, I think. If you'd like to follow me, I have a page on Facebook. I have a page on LinkedIn. Um, you can follow me on Twitter. All of those handles are the same, and that's Dr. like DRMA Harvey. And that handle will probably get you there.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone,
you,
for
everyone.
joining us tonight. And I will remind everyone that this was recorded, so you will be able to share the replay or re-listen if you had to step away during any part of the conversation. You can listen to it on the replay, and I will share that out on LinkedIn. So thank you, Sophie, for co-modding. Thank you, Dr. Harvey, for your time. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey. Good night.
Thank
Okay.
you to all of you.
Okay, I will close out in 3, 2, and 1. Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night.